Well, we are still thinking. Yeah, there we go. We are still thinking about beginnings and what we believe about our world and where it came from. And this morning we are thinking about God's wonderful world from the reading that we've just had. But as you would expect from what is an altogether slot, I obviously have 3 questions for you to think about and to chat through over dinner later. They will be, firstly, who is in charge of the world? Secondly, how involved is God in his world? And thirdly, what does God want from the people that he has made? And you'll be glad to know that if you're in here, they will stay up on the screen because Ian's going to freeze it for us as we begin to think about the next bit. We've learned so far from the Bible's teaching that God made the world. He made the whole world, and he made it with the words he spoke. We've learned about that over the last few weeks. He made the land and the sea and everything in them. God knows all about all that he has made, and he's in charge of his world. Well, in the reading we just had, we started to hear a retelling of what God's creation looked like in a specific area of the planet. It's like a zooming in moment. And it tells us of the time, specifically of the time that God made people. First, a man, we read that, and later in the passage that we'll look at in one of the next 2 weeks, a woman, so that they could be a complementary and happy team living in God's good world that he had made for people to live in. So the first people God made were Adam and Eve. God made Adam and Eve, we read. And when God made people, God wanted them to look after the world that he had made, to take care of it. Now, because God had made Adam and Eve, they belonged to God. Well, what does that mean? If God makes you and you belong to him, well, that means that God is the one who's in charge, or should be. But not only was God in charge of Adam and Eve, he looked after them too. We read of a really, really special garden, a beautiful garden. God knew what they needed, and God looked after them. The garden had food growing for Adam and Eve to eat. And while they lived there, God knew and loved Adam and Eve. God knew Adam and Eve because he'd made them. God knew all about them, and he knew how he wanted them to live. God loved them. He gave them a world with so much food that it was even more spectacular than going into the oasis at Meadowhall and being told you can have anything to eat from it. So much food to choose from. But yes, God also wanted them because he's in charge. God wanted them to obey him. God told them what he wanted them to do. He wanted them to do what he said. God said that they could eat from any of the fruit of any tree in the garden except for one. There was one tree that Adam and Eve shouldn't eat from. If they ate from this tree, they would surely die, he said. So to think of going to the oasis in Meadowhall, that's you can have anything to eat from any of the stores, but you can't buy a donut. That sounds like a good deal. God wanted Adam and Eve to obey him because God's way is the best. If eating the fruit would mean they would die, God told them not to so that they wouldn't die. Because God's way is best. God was in charge. He knew what was best. He knew how they should live because he had made them, and he knew them and he loved them. God was their king, and he wanted them to obey him. But if they chose not to, God said that there would be a punishment. There would be a consequence for choosing to reject him. He told them how to live his way. He told them what he wanted them to obey. He told them what would happen if not. Well, what about us? God made the world and God made Adam and Eve, but that's not all God did, is it? God didn't just make Adam and Eve. God made everyone, everywhere, because people can have children and so the world continues. But if God made the world, then God made where we live too. And if God made Adam and Eve, that means God made us. God made everyone and knows everyone. And so everyone in God's wonderful world should belong to him. God made us and knows us, and he knows how he wants us to live. Now, since God was in charge of Adam and Eve and God made everyone, so God is in charge of us. And God looked after Adam and Eve, and we see in our world that there is lots to eat. Even if it's hoarded and not shared out fairly. God made me, and God made you, and God made all our friends and all our family. God made all the people who live in Sheffield, and in Richmond, and in your street. Well, God knew and loved Adam and Eve. God knows and loves us. And so he wants us to live his way and obey him, because living God's way is the best way to live. God wanted Adam and Eve to obey him. He wants us to obey him too. Why? Well, because God's way was the best. Then it is still the best now. If Adam and Eve didn't obey God, there would be a punishment. Well, disobeying God will mean punishment for us too. And so whilst God made all the world, and he made us, and he's in charge of us, and he looks after us, and he knows us and loves us, and he wants us to obey him, we've said, go away. That's stealing one of the next bits of the story, but that's where the story goes. But God designed his wonderful world to work like that. For us to be his people. To be people he knows and loves and cares for. And us to be people who obey him and follow him. Well, God made us and knows us. He wants us. He knows how he wants us to live. We can't do that, so he sent someone to do it for us. We know of him as Jesus. And he didn't disobey God and took the punishment we deserve for disobeying God. And that means if we trust him, God can be in charge of us again, because we choose to put him in charge. And we can obey him knowing his rule is best, because he'll help us do that. And that will mean we won't have to have the punishment for disobeying him. Now, to help us think through this story and hold it in our heads, I've got a little action rhyme. I know you're all looking forward to this. So, it goes like this. God, participation straight away, that's what I like to see. God made the world, the land, that's harder for me because I'm stood up, there we go, the sky and the sea. God made people, and God made me. So God's in charge of the world. The land, the sky, the sea. God's in charge of people. But the question is God in charge of me? Can we have our song, please? So that's new.